There are so many different Pokemon apps that have released on iOS and Android or just mobile phones that aren't related to the mainline Pokemon games. I mean, so many. I decided to try them all. And boy, oh boy, what an experience this was. Okay, what if I told you there was a Pokemon dating app called Pok&eacute? I mean, that would be crazy. And there is an app called Pok&eacute, but it wasn't a dating app. It was something completely different. But I just thought that's an interesting name. Pok&eacute released all the way back in 2006 on mobile devices. It wasn't like the era of iPhone or Android, so, you know, things are a little more primitive back then. And it only released in Japan, though it seems like there were plans to release it in the West, but that never ended up actually happening. This was really interesting. It was like a mobile social media that had Pokemon involved in it, where you could like catch Pokemon, trade Pokemon, and message your friends who also use the Pok&eacute app. The game was pretty simple. You couldn't like trade them to like a main game, and you couldn't really battle with the Pokemon you caught, but you could collect them, and while you were limited with how many Pokeballs you had, you could subscribe and get more Pokeballs on a monthly basis, or you could just take care of the Pokemon that you did catch. And they were like kind of just a virtual pet simulator for your phone. It was pretty primitive, but I mean, it was something, and this is one of like the earliest official Pokemon apps. Now, apparently they did show off an English translation of the game at one point, but it was never seen again, and the whole game was discontinued just 2 years later in 2008, so we never actually got to see that. Then on the other hand, there was a game called Pokemon Jukebox that released on Android in 2015. Why this one exists is kind of beyond me, but they decided to make an entire app just to listen to Pokemon music. You know, they could just like put it on Spotify or Apple Music or something, but no, we have a whole dedicated app just to Pokemon music where you can listen to some of the free songs or purchase songs with real money. The app would cycle through songs, and then slowly over time you could collect them all by buying them or just listen to the free ones. And there was a lot of like songs from every game, and there was like medleys included, which are kind of cool. This one was pretty short-lived. It lasted for like a year, and then they discontinued the service, where if you still purchase music, you could listen to the songs, but you couldn't download any other songs from the app. Pokemon Jukebox, everybody. There was another game called Dancing Pokemon Band. This one was only a limited release, available on the App Store and Android market in Japan only from summer of 2015 until like the fall of 2015, and then it was taken away. Now, this app was based on the Pikachu short, Pikachu and the Pokemon Band, and essentially it's like a tapping rhythm game. That's kind of it. It's pretty basic. There's a couple of Pokemon you can play as, and they updated the game and added like Mewtwo. But this one was definitely one of the more forgotten games, especially since it never saw like an English release, and it was very short-lived. Okay, then there was an application called Pokemon Pass, and I think they thought this was like the most genius thing, and it didn't stick around. They really tried. It was around since 2019, and it only was delisted last year, but this one was only available in North America, unlike the other ones that saw like Japanese releases. Essentially, the way the app would work is you would get like a challenge every once in a while to go to a certain location and open up the Pokemon Pass app at that location, and then you would unlock rewards. Like sometimes there could be in-game gifts for Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu or Let's Go Eevee, or you get like Pokemon photo stickers for your camera. And it wasn't just restricted to Let's Go. They did do some of the events for Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon for a short amount of time, and they later on would do Sword and Shield as well. But after just a few events, they were kind of just like giving out like stickers and stuff a lot of the time. Some of the quests would be like, open the app at Target, open the app at Best Buy, open the app at Walmart. Honestly, there weren't really all that many events. Maybe the Pokemon Company thought they could make a lot of money by encouraging the Pokemon fans to go to these stores, and maybe they did some partnership with some of these stores, but I don't think it actually worked all that well. Obviously, when the pandemic happened, this whole idea like was shut down. Like they didn't want people going to stores just to open up apps back then. And the application briefly came back in 2021 with two special things where you could open the app at GameStop or open the app at the front entrance of GameStop. I don't know why that one's different. But yeah, this one was an interesting concept, and then it was immediately like abandoned. Also in 2019, there was a brief game called Pokemon Wave Hello. It was released for the Google Pixel 4. It didn't see a total worldwide release, but it's still released in multiple different countries like the US, Canada, UK, Ireland, Australia, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, India, Singapore, Taiwan, and Japan. This was just kind of like a quick collaboration where you could interact with Pokemon by using the special like Pixel 4 gestures that they had set up. I don't think there was really a whole lot of depth here. It was just like something to try to, you know, get people invested in some of the features that the phone had. This app ended up getting removed in 2022. As someone who doesn't spend too much time actually playing mobile games, Pokemon Masters EX is probably one of the few games that has caught my attention at least multiple times over the last couple of years. Besides the fact that the gameplay is interesting, it's like this real-time strategy battle type game, there's this interesting approach with this game where you assemble a team of not only only Pokemon, but also Pokemon in their trainers, essentially like these team pair-ups. And I think overall, this game is one of the cooler ones. What's really unique about it is the fact that they do a lot for the community of Pokemon, people who've been fans for years and years, by including really interesting experiences that sometimes feature old characters from various Pokemon games. Often characters we haven't seen in years or sometimes decades, they'll just show up in this game. And there's always something cool about them because they have like a cool partner Pokemon from their team with them. This is definitely one of the more polished Pokemon experiences you can get on mobile devices, and it's a good one to look at as kind of where the bar is set. I think that the amount of depth that this game goes into with storytelling, gameplay, and just the amount of updates this game still receives with different events does make this one pretty above the par when it comes to Pokemon mobile games. I don't know, while I don't always come back and play this game, every once in a while I hear about something in this game and I'm like, huh, that's something kind of neat. This character's back? Oh, what's going on here? What's the story about? Why does this game get some of the cooler stuff than the actual games? I mean, it's a mobile game. It is different. It's not a full Pokemon experience. You don't get to just do everything you would do in a regular Pokemon game, but for something kind of to the side as a little spin-off for mobile devices, it's pretty good. Okay, maybe it's time we talk about Pokemon Magikarp Jump. This one was such a wild game. Who would have thought that Magikarp would get his own game? And this was one I somehow missed out on when it first released, so I dove into this one for this video and gave it a go, and it was kind of what I expected. Actually, maybe it was even less than what I expected. This game essentially is just like a clicker trainer game where you just tap a lot of buttons. That's how you progress and get better at the game. There's really like not a whole lot of depth on the surface to that main mechanic. You have to essentially get a Magikarp and train him and raise him by just like tapping on the screen, and then you get stronger, and then you compete against other people who have jumping Magikarps, and that's the basis of the entire game. Now, I gotta say, as basic as the game is, and as much as I don't think this is a game that would really keep my attention long term, there is surprisingly a lot going on that I could see some people getting really invested in this. Like, for instance, there's a lot of decorative items you can unlock, there's friendship items you can get, you can really like max out your Magikarp if you want, so much to the point where you can retire him and evolve him into a Gyarados. And you know what? The writing is surprisingly charming for this just being a mobile game. I was very impressed with the opening. It kind of was very reminiscent to the old school Pokemon games. There's some fairly funny lines in there, like this line where it refers to Magikarp as a tragic carp. I don't know why that one made me chuckle. I just thought it was funny. It was ironic and it was self-aware. And I think the whole concept of having a, whole competition series based on Magikarp of all Pokemon is a funny premise. I think that this one was done as well as it could have been done for what the topic is, and I think this one's a W. I think this was a big win. I mean, I don't think I'm gonna play it forever, but still, it was a more polished experience, something more relevant than some of the other canceled apps that have existed, and I was quite proud of this one, I think. I think Pokemon did a good job. I'd like to see more games like this, but I don't know if we necessarily need like a Pokemon Magikarp Jump 2. There were things supported in the game for quite a while, surprisingly, and slowly the updates slowed down. There's been some small bug performance type improvements over the last couple of years. Things really slowed in 2018, but it's still supported. It's still out there. They still can have people play it, and I think that's kind of cool. I mean, look how high Magikarp jumps here. It's very impressive, and you can feed them, and you can collect these other things, and there's different themes you can get along the way. There's a lot to like here. I don't know. Maybe the more I think about this and the more I play it, it's maybe kind of growing on me. Magikarp Jump is such a cool game. Then on the other hand, there's a game like Pokemon Cafe Remix, and okay, this game, maybe not like my full cup of tea, mostly because, I don't know, it's just a puzzle game with a lot of other stuff going on. And the best part about the game is a lot of other stuff going on, but as far as like a core puzzle game experience, it's just not really my like go-to game that I want to play, but I do like what they're doing with it, if that makes sense. Okay, so Pokemon Cafe Remix. This is one of the few Pokemon games I did also play on mobile devices before working on this video. I played it on my Switch, surprisingly, because it also is on there. It's an interesting concept. You essentially like manage this cafe that's staffed with Pokemon, and you have to complete different puzzles, and that's like the whole baking, cooking process. From there, you can customize your cafe, and there's like different engaging things that happen, like there's new events or special Pokemon will come up. But by far, the biggest draw about this game is just the Pokemon setting and the atmosphere of Pokemon. Over the years, Pokemon's done a great job at just like setting the stage for what the world of Pokemon is like. And this is another game where you get to kind of live out that fictional universe in a very specific role. And I think the art style and like the design philosophy behind this game really do a good job at highlighting that. But I mean, it's a game just kind of like Candy Crush at the end of the day. It's fine. It's better than some of the games that are in this list. Don't get me wrong, because boy, oh boy, some of these games that are in this list are something else. But yeah, it's a good game to kill some time with. I think the best part of the game is getting to customize parts of your cafe and make it unique, but I would love to see just more. I wish it was like a full-on tycoon level game where you pick prices and do all these like really specific changes to try to balance your profits and losses, and you know, you're at risk of going bankrupt at any given moment. Now that would be an interesting game. I don't think they do that with Pokemon because it's supposed to be like a relaxing game, not a stressful game reminding people of their finances, but I digress. This is a fun game. It gets a pass. Then there's Pokemon Quest, and this one, it's a little weird to me. It hasn't had any substantial updates over the years, but it's still one that's kind of like front and center when it comes to Pokemon games on mobile devices. And for what it is, it's an okay game. It's essentially where you take Pokemon and you take Minecraft's art style and combine them together, and then take out a lot of like the RPG elements of Pokemon, and we have this game. This game only features the original 151 Pokemon from the Kanto region. Essentially, you set up your own base camp of operations, and you set up your decorations or whatever and get stuff all set up. You can go and get new Pokemon by attracting them with food. Then you train up your Pokemon team. You try to make it the best you can so you can go on expeditions, and these are like kind of like the main levels of the game. Your Pokemon can attack, it can use defensive moves. The gameplay is not like a typical Pokemon game, but it is something a little bit interesting. I feel like this game had a lot going for it on day one, and a lot of people jumped on board day one because it seemed exciting. However, after you play this game for a little bit, the gameplay loop does start to feel, I don't know, maybe repetitive, and tie that to the fact that some of the Pokemon that do appear are really just RNG based. It means that mileage may vary on this game, and it can be a little tedious to get a specific Pokemon that you want. But at the end of the day, it's a simple game. It's just not maybe the most in-depth Pokemon game that's out there. It's still out there. There's not really support for it anymore, and they never added new Pokemon to the game, which was surprising. I feel like that would be an easy thing to do. But, I mean, this was just something that they tried, and I don't know how much longer it'll be available. I have a feeling that they'll one day sunset it. Maybe since it's not a full live service, they don't have to sunset it right away. But I don't see this game being like the biggest, most loved Pokemon game that's out there. Okay, back when I was a kid, I had the Pokemon trading card game for the Game Boy. It was incredible. You got to play the Pokemon trading card game, which a lot of us as kids didn't even know how to play the game. We just traded the cards and looked at the art pieces. But this game actually kind of taught you how to play the game. So that was really cool, and I really did enjoy it once I figured out how to play the game. Collecting the cards in this virtual cartridge was really awesome. And while I collected Pokemon cards as a kid, as any kid did in the 90s, 2000s, it was really cool that later on you were able to just go online and play like a virtual Pokemon card trading card game. You could even scan your pack and add it into the game at one point, I think. And while I didn't do it as much as probably someone else would have who really was into the trading card game, it still was a cool little feature I picked up from time to time. Then, recently, they decided to overhaul everything and release an app called Pokemon Trading Card Game Live. What a terrible experience this was. Okay, hear me out. The idea of being able to play the Pokemon Trading Card Game on the go, on your phone, great idea. I love it conceptually. For whatever reason, whenever I try to log in, it just doesn't work for me. Like my email address doesn't work. There's like some forgotten password system's not working. I don't know what it is. I had to end up starting all fresh on this, which was really annoying with a different email because my old email is still linked to my account that may or may not actually exist. But even once you get in there, there's some issues with this app, I think, that are still prevalent all this time later. There's been reports of battery drain being incredibly high for some reason, RNG not actually being as random as it probably should be. Like, there's been a lot of cases of people saying that their deck shuffles aren't as shuffled as they should be, which I think is incredible. I haven't played it long enough to really catch on to all the little nuanced things that more seasoned players of this game will have noticed. I mean, I was only able to finally get an account working recently, but just from the few issues I've seen alongside other little things like crashes that can happen, it's no real surprise that this game has a 2.8 out of 5 on the Apple App Store, probably because of some of these issues. This is probably one of the lowest rating Pokemon games that's available on iOS, and it's a shame. I feel like this could work really, really well, but it's just like, why is it so broken? I don't understand. Okay, then there's 2 more apps that I think are a little bit out there maybe in concepts, but I mean, why not, Pokemon? Just do it. They have Pokemon Sleep and Pokemon Smile. Now, Pokemon Sleep is an app that you're supposed to have on when you go to sleep on your bed, and it like tracks your like sleeping. There's a ton of sleeping apps like that that are out there. Of course, there's always the fear that like your phone will catch on fire because it's like on the bed with you. I don't know. I've never really been a fan of sleep tracking apps because I feel like my sleeping routine is so dysfunctional as it is. I don't need an app telling me how terrible I am as a person for sleeping so terribly. But for some people who need to track their sleep, why not have a Pokemon themed one? I mean, I'm supportive of it. There's a lot of like Snorlax involved in it, and I did reluctantly try to use this app myself, and once again when my phone started heating up a lot because I just had it sitting on my pillow with the screen display still on. Maybe I was supposed to turn that off. It just was getting really hot, and in the middle of the night I got nervous and just like shut the whole thing down. Pokemon Smile, on the other hand, is an app obviously intended for like young children who are learning how to brush their teeth, because it's supposed to encourage children to brush their teeth, remember to brush their teeth, where to brush their teeth, and it rewards players for like brushing their teeth on a regular basis. As an adult, I feel like the logistics of trying to hold up a phone while you're brushing your teeth is a little bit like more struggle than it's worth, but I do think this is a great app for kids and to, you know, get them excited about brushing their teeth, especially if they like Pokemon. So yeah, cool. I don't think there's any more depth for this. I don't think they made this with the intention of like adult Pokemon players playing it, but they knew some would. Now, Pokemon Unite was probably one of the biggest game releases that came out on mobile, though it did have a Nintendo Switch release as well, fully supporting crossplay, which is really cool. This game was essentially League of Legends, but like a little simpler and with Pokemon instead. Actually, I think this is a really, really cool concept, taking another game genre that's really popular and applying it to Pokemon in a free-to-play format that has crossplay, multiplayer support, something you can finally do with your friends in Pokemon. Like, Pokemon is a lot of the time kind of lacking on like team-based things you can do with other people, so this was an awesome concept. In execution, well, I don't know if it's just me not really liking MOBA type games in general, or maybe it was just that Pokemon Unite was just missing something kind of extra to reach out to the broader audience. I remember when this game came out, a lot of people were jumping on trying it out. I even played it for at least like a week before I kind of got bored with it. And I think at the end of the day, it was more just a hardcore audience that ended up sticking with it and continued to play Pokemon Unite long term, and a lot of players did fall off. But the game didn't come out without any criticisms either. The way that the microtransactions worked in this game, while mostly used just for cosmetics, a feature in the game known as item enhancers exists, which players could get by paying real money to earn them. Now, fortunately enough, Pokemon Unite does allow players to earn these item enhancers themselves just by playing the game. And realistically, the advantage you get from spending real money to get these item enhancers in top level competitive play is probably really minuscule in how it would affect the outcome of the overall game, but it doesn't at all change the fact that having something that does give a little bit of an advantage that you can pay money for rubs a lot of players the wrong way, rightfully so, honestly. Now, since the game's released, it seems like item enhancers are given out more frequently for free than maybe what it was like at launch, but still, it just shows how important first impressions are in games like this. I do have to say, looking at this game now in 2024, it is interesting how many new characters they've added from the base set of characters that were originally there. There's a lot of Pokemon that you can now pick from, a lot of newer Pokemon represented, which kind of keeps things feeling fresh and new. You do always worry about that creep whenever a new hero is added in a game like this, that the new character will be overpowered so that people will maybe spend money to try to unlock the character sooner. And then once the character's been out for a minute, then the game will release some sort of nerf to balance out the playing field, which is done in a lot of different games that have like heroes and characters that release. It's still annoying though. For what it is though, I think Pokemon Unite is a really cool concept. It's a cool step in the right direction. I think we would love to see more Pokemon games embracing different genres that everyone can play together. but I feel like for now, Unite might just stay as a little bit more niche and maybe not as widespread or mainstream as what maybe the Pokemon Company initially wanted it to spread out to be. Of course, the elephant in the room when it comes to Pokemon games that are popular on mobile is Pokemon Go. I'm pretty sure everyone already knows about this game and has most likely, if you're watching this video, played it to some capacity, but the main gist of it, you travel around the real world using an app that tracks your location and you find Pokemon in different places and you try to catch them all. You then get to train your Pokemon, you go find more Pokemon. There's like special locations that serve as gyms where you can go and take the gyms by battling with your Pokemon. It's a pretty neat time. Now, when this game first came out, it was like one of the biggest crazes of all time when it came to like mobile games. It truly was the second coming of Pokemania after like the popularity in the late 90s. And it was just awesome. Everyone was out there playing Pokemon Go. Everyone was talking about the original 151 again. The news were talking about weird things happening relating to Pokemon Go. The music in that game, which is what you're listening to right now in the background of this track, was a banger. And then, myself included, after the initial hype wore off, the game kind of was just there. A lot of people stuck around long term, but I always struggled to find like the true purpose or end goal of Pokemon Go beyond just like randomly catching all the Pokemon that you could find. I always thought that there was a lot of potential, but I really wanted there to be more. I wanted there to be more content, some sort of maybe narrative story that grew over time as more people played and experienced the game. I wanted to feel almost more like that trailer that initially showed off Pokemon Go for the first time. It never really felt like it quite got there. On the other hand, Pokemon Go did release quite a few updates, adding a lot of great content that did keep its core player base that stuck around coming back, adding new Pokemon, special events, and all types of things to really just keep the player base coming. I've seen a lot of people get back into Pokemon Go and kind of go through this period of time where they're really addicted to the game again, and I just haven't really gone through that phase yet where I'm really sucked back into Pokemon Go. Every once in a while I'll pick it up, play it a little bit, see what's going on, see if it's something I want to be hooked back into like back in the old days, and it hasn't quite captured me back that way. But I mean, maybe one of you guys out there is a huge Pokemon Go fan and you can kind of explain to me what I'm missing. Like, what is the like goal that just like makes you want to keep playing? Because I'm still looking for it. I want to like Pokemon Go more. I love the fact you can transfer your Pokemon to main games, but beyond that, what are we working with here? I don't know. Okay, does anyone remember the Pokemon Rumble games? These games were interesting. Sure, they were charming for their own right, I guess. They were like these beat 'em up Pokemon games available on like the Wii. It was on 3DS and Wii U. They made quite a few of them, and I don't think they ever were like super popular. But hey, a lot of the times you could just like pick them up, play them for a little bit, and then put them down. Yeah, after they had their run on all of these different devices, the Pokemon Company decided, you know what? Let's drop it on the iOS and Android stores because people are gonna love a wild adventure like that. And Pokemon Rumble Rush would release for mobile devices, and it was okay. I mean, it is what it is. It was that game, but translated for mobile devices. I don't know, you ran through some different stages and fought wild Pokemon. You had to like clear a boss at the end of each stage, and you kind of just did your gameplay by like tapping on the screen. You could then collect things called ores and turn them into gears. Then you could get upgrade kits, use them on the gears, get your gears onto your Pokemon to boost their stats, or you can use a different type of gear called a summon gear, and that allows like your allied Pokemon to use a really strong attack. They had to put something in there that they could kind of have the addicting side of the game be more prevalent. You know, there's something about like sitting there waiting for the stuff to be ready so you can use it and continue to play the game that does work for some players, but also is like a major turn away for a lot of other players. I really don't like games that do like the little like wait time type thing. Don't worry, this game did have microtransactions that well. There was like a starter pack that gave you a bunch of stuff like ore and some like gems or something, and they had a bunch of different types of options. But the real win here was you could connect your Nintendo account and have your Mii on your game profile, so everyone could know what type of Mii you had created, what type of monstrosity you have created. Okay, let's be real. Is it any surprise that this game was very short-lived, releasing in 2019 and pretty much being shut down the following year? No. I mean, the Pokemon Rumble games weren't really, I think, anything that people were like the most excited about for Pokemon across the board. And this coming out in 2019 after there was already like other better Pokemon games like Pokemon Go available, I don't know. I just don't see why they thought this one would be so successful to do this like worldwide launch. But this did mark the death of the Pokemon Rumble series. All right, so do you guys remember Pokebank? That was really cool. It was like finally the all-in-one place where you could transfer your Pokemon from older games, have them all chill in the Pokemon bank, and then you could transfer them into your main game when you're ready, like Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Sure, there was a lot of steps always to get your Pokemon all the way from 3rd generation, transfer to 4th, 5th, 6th, onward. On the 3DS, rest in peace Pokemon Bank, but now it's been replaced with something new. newer, known as Pokemon Home. Okay, so Pokemon Home essentially was just like Pokemon Bank 2.0, but this time it's on mobile devices, which is interesting. It works mostly the way you would want it to work. I mean, you can always opt in for a subscription if you really need like the most amount of storage possible, but it is interesting. You can transfer your Pokemon from Pokemon Go, which is really cool to finally be able to take those Pokemon and bring them into your actual Pokemon game on the Switch, if the Pokemon is allowed on the game on the Switch. With Pokemon Sword and Shield, we saw a major reduction into which Pokemon were actually available. And sure, as more DLC would release, more Pokemon would be added into the game. But if the Pokemon wasn't put into the game, and like there wasn't a file for the Pokemon existing, like a model of the character on the Switch version of the game, you can't transfer them over. And I think that that's kind of disappointing. I feel like this was like kind of a cut corner, considering every other Pokemon series prior to the Switch era would have every Pokemon in the game. At least the files for every Pokemon in the game, so you could transfer them into your game. This is definitely a debate that I don't need to be the one to lead the charge on. A lot of people have probably said it better than I have, but Pokemon is like the highest grossing franchise. You know, they could dish out the money to model a couple extra Pokemon and have all of the files there. And the Switch hardware definitely isn't restrictive. We've seen some beautiful games released on the Switch, and that's like a whole other story. I digress. But yeah, Pokemon Home, it was the replacement. It's fine. It does the job enough. It's not anything to write home about for an app, but we have to include it in this video. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of current Pokemon games that people play nowadays, but what about some of the earliest and oldest games that did roll out onto mobile devices? I mean, if we want to get real technical here and we're talking about mobile applications, we kind of have to talk about mobile Game Boy adapter, which was used with Pokemon Crystal. Now, this thing was only available in Japan, which does explain for why a lot of special events that you would expect to have come to Pokemon Gold, Silver, Crystal never actually came to the West. But back in the day, if you're in Japan, there were exclusive events for Pokemon Crystal that you could only access by connecting to the mobile system Game Boy application, buying this special link cable that connected it to a phone. There were a handful of other games that were supported by this device, but Pokemon Crystal, being the ultimate form of the second generation of Pokemon games, was kind of the most popular one, and there was even a special thing known as Mobile Trainer that was sold alongside it that would allow for other Pokemon players to actually email each other utilizing the phone's cellular data, and then you could like battle each other through the device, I believe. There were special events given out, like the special GS Ball event that allowed you to go and capture Celebi legitimately. In Goldenrod City in the game, the Pokemon Center was actually the Pokemon Communication Center, and there you could access those downloads, or you could trade and battle with your friends. There was special Pokemon distribution events, and even tie-ins to Pokemon Stadium 2, for Japan only, of course. Though the service wasn't very successful, in the early 2000s, Pokemon was mostly just a kid's game. Adults weren't really all that interested, and how many 10-year-olds had cell phones back then? And so this service, unfortunately, shut down just a couple of years later, prior to the releases of Ruby and Sapphire, and a lot of this content is mostly actually lost media other than some of the emulated and recreated systems using data available that's out there. Game archiver Chickasaurus GL has managed to preserve some of these screens so that we can look at them and see them, but with Pokemon Crystal having a limited Game Boy Color battery inside, the chances of a Pokemon Crystal game from the early 2000s still with a surviving battery that also at one point had connected to the limited run of the mobile adapter GB and still had all of the information that was downloaded from those applications is pretty slim to hope that that still exists, since most of the batteries kind of go out after like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. Still, something incredibly interesting from the older days of mobile applications. But Elijah, what about some of the games that released on mobile devices that you can't play at all anymore? Like Pokédex 3D and Pokédex 3D Pro? Now, the Pokédex 3D app originally started off as a Nintendo eShop game that you could get on your 3DS all the way back in the day, and it was kind of neat, and then later on they upgraded it that had more stuff in it. I guess the Pro version had a national Pokédex that had all of the Pokemon, and you had to pay for it. And then if I understand correctly, part of it was Japanese exclusive, and then it was removed from the eShop, and then later on, it released internationally on the official iOS App Store, and yeah, you could look at the Pokédex from your phone. I mean, it was cool, it was neat. I mean, it's not like a full-fledged Pokemon game on iOS, which would have been pretty cool, but at least you had access to something. I don't know, I always felt like whenever there's official support for a Pokédex app that Nintendo puts out, whether it's like a web-based one or like we see here, it's never like as detailed as if you like pulled up Cerebi.com or you looked on like Bulbapedia for information about the Pokemon. So it always seemed like it was missing something something, but it is at least something. It's an option to look through some of the Pokemon. This one existed for a little while. They stopped supporting it prior to the releases of Pokemon Sun and Moon, so 2015 was the end of this, and the Pokedex 3D app would be forever forgotten after that. All the way back in 2016, there was the short-lived Pokemon photo booth, where you could post pictures of yourself, and then you would be able to add captions, kind of like in the Pokemon art style. I don't really know why this one existed, to tell you the truth. I always thought that this one was a little weird, and it's not too surprising that it was discontinued not too long after it made its debut. I mean, I guess it's a neat idea, but I don't know how many people actually ended up using this one. There's a couple of articles out there discussing its existence, but yeah, maybe it's something more for kids, not necessarily something like a main hardcore Pokemon adult fan would be looking at today. Pokemon Duel was actually a really interesting one that released in 2016 in some territories and later in more places in 2017. This game, interestingly enough, was a free-to-play Pokemon board game developed by the studio Heroes and then obviously published by the Pokemon Company. It was available on Android and iOS. This one is actually really interesting because it was essentially a shot at revitalizing a concept Pokemon tried launching years earlier. Back in 2007, Pokemon launched an official trading figure game where you had to collect little Pokemon figures, and then there was like a board game associated with it that you could play with these figures in different formats, like a 3-on-3 playmat or like a 6-on-6 playmat. There was a little bit of strategy, there was some luck involved, but I think Pokemon really went all in thinking that this would be a really big thing. They even hosted an official trading figure game world championship in 2008, and outside of that, the whole figure thing never really caught on. It died after that. Matter of fact, there was a new release set of more figures set to release that kept getting delayed until it was just discontinued altogether, and that set never ended up releasing. So then, interestingly enough, 7 years later, the game is brought back in a digital virtual game form, which brings us to Pokemon Duel. I find it interesting that this game was a multiplayer game, but it had this single player narrative where the player is a participant in the Pokemon Figure World Championship. Slowly over time they would release more narrative content, but this game also, I guess, wasn't popular enough, and it ended up getting discontinued 2 years after its launch, and they never even finished out the story. They kind of just left things hanging. There's only 6 out of the 10 hotels that were part of the story that were opened. Now, this game did have mixed reception. It did serve kind of as a gacha system with microtransactions where you have to unlock different figures, which could be expected from something like this where the whole point is collecting and using figures. But yeah, interesting concept that never stuck around. There was a game called Camp Pokemon that released on iOS back in 2014 and later saw an Android release in 2016, but essentially was a game intended for definitely the younger Pokemon fans that are out there. It was kind of neat. It was more just a little collection of mini games you could play with little areas you could go and explore and check out the Pokemon. There was actually some interesting things like being able to watch videos from the Pokemon TV application where you can watch episodes of Pokemon or clips from Pokemon. It would tell you the latest Pokemon news. There was a photo booth, and all in all, I don't know if there was a lot of replayability after you've gone through and done most of the things, but at least it was something kind of polished and neat, and they would update it occasionally with more games. They updated it when Sun and Moon came out, adding more Pokemon. Sometime though, after the main release in 1.3, they ended up discontinuing further support of it and delisting it from the app stores. Though if you had downloaded it back in the day, most of the features in the game are still intact and you could experience it, which is kind of cool. I think Android users could find a back way to re-download it if they didn't have it anymore. But outside of that, Camp Pokemon is definitely not something that continues to be supported to this day. Pokemon has not been scared to throw ideas out there and then just abandon them if they don't have the wide success that they hope for. After this support ended though, I think things switched up and Pokemon Playhouse was the successor to that, which technically is still available, though I don't think they release any more updates for it. It's still on the App Store. I checked. You can download it and experience it. This game is definitely implied for littler kids, maybe even younger than before, as there's no reading requirement. Everything is fully voice acted, which is interesting. But this game's a little bit different. This time you have some little tasks you want to do, you have to befriend different Pokemon and hatch eggs, complete different activities. There are a couple of different activities you can participate in and do, which is interesting. Mostly little tiny basic mini games. But I have to say, this game is notable because it does have its own unique art style, different from like the mainline Pokemon games. It kind of reminds me of like my Pokemon Ranch, which had all the Pokemon kind of in this different form, which was different from what all the mainline games had them displayed as. This one does that too, with these like big head Pokemon. I don't know how to explain it. It is interesting though to see them illustrated like this, kind of illustrated like a Nick Jr. cartoon, to be honest, but it's something different. What can I say? Like, you can go and experience everything in like 5 minutes if you want to, but it's not something for like the hardcore Pokemon fans. This is something for like kids who are like, I don't know, 2 to like 12 maybe at the most, and 12 would be like pushing it. As for this one though, the last content update was back in 2019 and it wasn't even that significant, and then there's been some minor updates on Android through 2020, fixing bugs and some performance issues, but outside of that, I'm pretty sure that this thing is kind of abandonware also. But not totally abandoned, because you can still download it today, which is better than what some of these other games that we've talked about can have done. Way back in the day in 2011, there was a game called Pokemon Say Tap, and of course, this game was only released in Japan. We're talking old school iOS, or technically you could play it on like a browser on like a PC. This game was released on the iPhone 3GS, so like the 3rd generation of iPhones, iPod Touches, and the 1st generation of iPad. Or if you had like a Samsung Galaxy S, like the first one for Android, you could play on that too. Or like the rare Sony Xperia or HTC Aria. These are like old school Android and iPhone days, way back at like the turn of people starting to use smartphones for the first time. And Pokemon threw their hat in with a very basic but officially supported rhythm game. The game essentially uses Pokemon cards on the screen, and you tap on like the screen in rhythm with the song lyrics. This one was very, very basic, but also this was like the early days of iOS games, and I just think it's interesting that this existed. The design of it is very simplified. I mean, it's interesting. Like, the song uses one of the themes from the anime, and obviously there's a lot of like inclusions of the new Pokemon Black and White characters for its time, because Gen 5 had just come out. But outside of the basic game, there wasn't too much going on. There was an online leaderboard where you could try to rise to the top in Japan and be the best Pokemon tapper that there is. But this was like the start of it all. This is where it all started for like smartphones. I mean, they'd had other Pokemon apps before, but like smartphone right here. This is the origin. This is legacy, if that makes sense. Okay, there's still a couple more discontinued or abandoned apps that the Pokemon Company has released over the years. There was one called Learn Real English through Pokemon XY Translation Scope. This was, interestingly enough, released only in Japan, and it was a app that was kind of like an educational tool to aid in the learning of the English language through a series of like different types of puzzles and quizzes and like little mini games. There was apparently some connectivity that you could do to Pokemon X and Y. There was like some dictionaries with terminology, and ultimately I would say the biggest takeaway was that the art was kind of cool, especially the app icon. I mean, look at this. This is awesome. This one was discontinued in 2015, just a couple years after its release. Way back in the earlier days, we're talking 2006, there was an application called Pokemon Mobile that was available on Singular Wireless, T-Mobile, Nextel. Do you guys remember that? Alltel and Midwest Wireless. It was like a Pokemon app. You could download wallpapers and ringtones for your mobile phone, and that was pretty much it. The company that collaborated with making this was known as Ziggy Inc., and they were like one of the largest distributors of like ringtones and wallpapers back then. And they were kind of pricey back in the day, I remember. Wallpapers were like $1.99 and ringtones were like $3. Ringtones! I'm looking back at some of the wallpapers they offered now, and they were just like still images from the Pokemon TV show. Like very, very basic stuff that you would pay money for, because we didn't know how to use computers and how to like transfer files from one place to the other. Okay, let's just go past this. But yeah, that's about it, I think, for this list, outside of Pokemon TV, which is just a TV app. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video though, maybe subscribe, especially if you're on TV. I know it's like 2 extra clicks, but it does go a long way. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. I mean, you can subscribe if you're not on TV too. We'll have more videos like this soon. It's been fun to try out some other things. We'll see you guys all soon though. Okay, I don't know what I'm saying. Goodbye.